So the questions are flying in thick and fast here. We have got a couple of questions actually, which are aimed at all scholars, which I'm just going to whiz down to. It'd help if I was looking at the open questions and not the answered questions. We have a question, if I can find it, from Frank Tomstone. And Frank has asked, have I got, Vicky, can you switch your camera on so we can see you?
It should be on, Ali.
Oh. Okay, maybe I've got a lag. I can't see Vicky at the moment, but I will assume that she's coming. So Frank has asked, what are the two main new things that you have already done or will do in your work as a result of your study? So as I still can't see Vicky at the moment, Penny, would you mind going first on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of sort of work streams that we're doing within the organisation. So we are introducing a mentoring programme for grassroots members, which we're launching on the 1st of January. And then the other one was around the work we do with alumni. I don't think we've given enough value to how much we rely on alumni and how we could tap into them and do more work with them as well.
Thanks, Penny. I don't know whether Chris or Dan want to come in on that question. Neither of them.
No. It's a great question. I mean, the whole reason for my study was that I was stuck in a rut and finding too much information. I think we've narrowed it down now here to what we're trying to do. So we're going to plant up some silvo pasture this year with my dad, something we've been talking about for a long time, and just giving it a go. Some of the bio stimulants that we wanted to use, we're going to start using those in small proportions this winter. So I think being able to give something a go, I've seen people managing to do that with great success.
Thanks, Dan. Chris, is there anything you've changed?
Yeah, I think we've done a on our own on the estate where I work. We've done a lot of planning for a lot more tree planting and hedge management, laying and gapping up. I think a lot of it has been planning to incorporate a lot more natural shelter on the farm, and the owner of our business actually decided that he wanted 20% coverage of all our land with trees, hedges and other habitats. So we've practically got on with that, and that kind of fits in with what I've been trying to achieve with just providing lots of shelter infrastructure across the farm. So we're planning to do a lot of that this winter and next.
Thanks, Chris. Vicky, do you want to come in on that question? Two things you've changed at work.
Yes, I mean, so I've been sharing some of the examples that I've seen both internally with work and with other groups that I've organised, I'm involved with, and trying to also get some of the people I met with to speak at conferences over here in the UK, or to speak to, again, some of the groups that I'm involved with. But I want to do more. I want to, now I've got this presentation done, have the opportunity to share what I've learnt more widely, both within the industry and at work as well.
Brilliant. There's another question which is aimed at everybody, and that's from Mark Tripney. I thought it was quite an amusing question. Echo chambers appear to be a significant problem in our industry. Each farmer sector, organisation and government department believing their own press. Well said. What would be each scholar's preferred tool or method to bring harmony to future policies for public and, most importantly, farming benefit? So tools and methods to bring some harmony to the sectors to stop the echo chambers. Who'd like to go first?
I don't mind going first, Ali.
Thanks.
My method would be to get everyone together, get everyone into a room, ideally. It's about building relationships, and I saw that very much throughout my travels, that it's that personal relationship, and people actually meeting each other and talking and finding things in common, even when they might expect not to have anything in common. So that would be my preferred method.
Anyone else want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, so I think, what Vicky said, I think it is, there's so much more scope for collaboration, and actually leaving egos at the door and trying to work together and achieve a joint approach to things. I think, yeah, there's so much scope to do that. And we, as working with young people, we should be leading by example and trying to provoke discussion on issues and pushing that debate.
Thanks, Penny. Chris or Dan?
I think it's about, you know, the concept really of echo chambers and how do we get outside our comfort zone. You know, the biggest thing is there's loads of common ground here. You know, we sort of talk about things as I think some of it comes to the fact that we like to package things as with simple terminology like organic or regenerative, but everyone really wants to produce food in a way that they can do it forever without ruining soils and whatever. There's loads of common ground. It's just a matter of kind of just, yeah, bringing everyone together physically. And I don't know how to put it really, but just we need to stop that the sort of siloed terminology and just get people to actually sit and discuss things on a practical level. Because there is loads of common ground, and people a lot of the time when you do bring people together and have that discussion, it flows naturally. You know, it's sometimes a bit abrasive, but that's life, isn't it?
Yeah. Dan, do you want to come in? Because I can move on to the next question.
It's fine. I didn't hear the question. My sound disappeared, so I don't know what the question was.
Oh,
so.
Bless you. Well, don't worry. I think we've had a really good. We've worked that one out. I'm going to move now to the individual scholar questions that have come in, and there are loads. I'm going to do my best to join them up and go through them as quickly as we can. Vicky, I think one of the first questions that came in, and actually somebody else has come in to say, yes, they'd like the answer to that as well, is the whole issue of the situation that we're now in terms of knowledge exchange, and how can we capture the factors that make in-person farm walks successful in a virtual environment? Is it possible to bring these advantages to farmers without actually being on site and getting muddy boots?
Yes, I mean, I think it's been interesting seeing how knowledge exchange has carried on and events have carried on. Everything's gone online. I think there's some huge benefits to that. I think there's benefits to people who haven't got the time or aren't able to attend events that they can attend. And I think what I've seen is a lot more people. We've been able to bring in speakers from overseas, which wouldn't necessarily be able to attend. And also, you can still be on farm. I think that for you could be on 2 or 3 different people's farms on one call. Rural connectivity has got a massive. I think it's a big issue here, and I think to enable knowledge exchange to be open to everyone as much as possible, we need to sort out rural connectivity. So I think it's great, but I think what is missing, and I know I'm starting to miss that, is that being face to face and actually that personal contact. So I think up to a point, I think it can actually broaden the knowledge exchange that can happen in terms of the breadth and the type of people. But I think in actually that personal contact is still needed. It can't completely replace it.
Thanks, Vicky. I'm going to come back to you with some others in a minute, just to move around so that you're not all sitting there silently. Penny, there's a good question that's come in here from Charlie York at the NFU Mutual. Hi, Charlie. As we see technology and process evolve in the industry, attracting new entrants and startups from non-farming backgrounds, thinking about your travel and the societies you visited, are they seeing new members coming from non-farming families, and how is that working?
Yeah, so I think all of us really are rural based now. So we still have those that are directly involved with agriculture. You've got those that are involved with sort of support sector for agriculture. I think the key is you are engaging with them at a young age, and they're having organic discussions with their fellow farmers. So there should be a natural highlight of the benefits of being involved with agriculture. It's not too forced. So we don't know the breakup within our organisation of how many are actually still farming and how many aren't. So yeah, it's very much rural now rather than agri for all of us, to be honest.
Right, thank you. Dan, there's a couple of questions here that have come in that I think are linked, both actually from Samuel Smith. His first question is, can you comment on if and how much regenerative agriculture is shifting the routes to market for farmers. That's the first. So the one is about route to market. And the other is, do you feel the regenerative ag movement is challenging what is grown? And I felt they were linked, actually, if you think about routes to market, and not just how it's grown. And if so, in what ways? I don't know whether you'd like to come back on both of those.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. I don't think so at the moment. I think the farmers, if you're a small farmer and you've got a local population, or you're small enough to be able to send your products elsewhere, you've probably already been doing that. I think the big issue is with the broadacre farmers who are producing commodity crops. The dairy farmers that are sending it off, those sort of farmers who aren't talking directly to their consumer. So the people who've already been talking to the consumer are still doing so. I think regenerative agriculture still needs to build a picture in the consumer's mind. As I said, otherwise it's very confusing for the consumer. What is regenerative agriculture? There's a nice Netflix documentary, but what does it actually mean, and why should I buy into it? So unless you buy locally, that's probably not happening at the moment. Sorry, can you remind me of the second point?
So the second point was around whether that changes what's grown. Yeah. So it's what we grow rather than how we grow it.
Yeah, well, the regenerative principles is to have living roots in the soil, to have ground covered at all time. So it's certainly people are growing a wider diversity of crops now. It's not a wheat, maize, or wheat rape rotation within regenerative agriculture. So it definitely will be changing what people are growing, and they're having to look at a broader spectrum of crops to grow. Yeah.
Right, Chris, it's your turn. Loads of questions popping up. Sorry, and I've had the least time to read yours. So first question here from Martin Steer. Chris, very inspirational. How do we change the mindset of planners and local planning officers to engage with some of the more innovative designs? And what role do the welfare societies have to help push this forward? Is that something you looked at?
Yeah, I think planners kind of have not as, it depends on which area you're in. In some areas, they're very keen on things like, we want stone cladding on the bottom half of the building, or we'd like timber cladding on the sides. How the inside feels and how the outside looks can be different. So there are possibilities. It kind of answers one of the other questions, actually, that just because even if you've got a simple portal frame building, there are ways of improving the inside of that by, for example, getting more natural light in. And a portal frame building can still be built with timber components instead of cold rolled steel purlins, for example. But in general, I think planners, certainly my experience is that they're not massively pushy on how a building looks, so long as it blends sensibly into the landscape. And so some will specify things like you've got to have dark green cladding. Some try and screen them with trees, and as our buildings get larger, they try and screen those with trees, because they think that it sort of doesn't blend properly into the whole picture landscape of the area. That's a big one that I had in the Netherlands. There was actually a farmer who kicked off with the local planners because they were saying, we want poplar trees planted in front of this to screen it, and she was saying, no, I want people to see that this is a farm and this is where their food comes from. I think it's really important to not hide our farms just because they're bigger. We want to talk about them. And so planners can be persuaded. They're not particularly difficult in my experience. And so long as you put forward a rationale for how you want your building to look different, they're pretty sensible. And in terms of welfare society, it's all about the balance of how are we trying to produce here. Because if the term factory farms isn't fair, but if your priority is intensive production, that's what your building will look and feel like, because you're trying to enclose it to control the environment. So we have to just decide what are our priorities, and how do we want to produce. And kind of to answer a separate question, just tying into that quickly, is someone asked me what on the Q&A, what do we think about public perception of buildings? Because the world is becoming more transparent about how we rear animals. We're reconnecting with consumers more. There's some radical transparency coming with things like apps for augmented reality. So you can look at a package in the supermarket and it will link you to the farm where that came from. You know, we need to think about how our buildings look to the uninformed public, because ones that have, you know, multiply replicated industrial appearance it just immediately associates the public with industrial production, just in general, not necessarily animals, but we need to think about that. So
okay,
yeah,
I'm going to throw the cost question at you next, because that's in there and I think it's a really good one. But before you answer that question, Vicky, there's a good question that's come in here from David Gardner about, in other industries, businesses keep their knowledge to themselves as a source of competitive advantage. Why should farmers be any different?
Yeah, and it's something that came up a lot in some of the discussions I had, and I call it sort of the red lines for sharing. So what I found interestingly in some countries, people are willing to share some things they do, but not others. So for example, some of the areas I visited in Canada, they didn't benchmark with their local their peers, but they did share very widely what they were doing with their cover crops. And another instance, a farmer actually wouldn't tell me how many cattle he had on his farm, because my host was his neighbour, but he would very happily share what he was doing with the cover crop. So I think for me, it's considering, first of all, you may not want to share all your knowledge, but some of this is valuable, but also actually really think about who is your competitor and is it really who you think it is. And so I think there's something there around reflecting on whether what you think might be really private and key to your business, it may not be. I mean, obviously, if you've got intellectual property rights, associated with something, and then that's different. But I do think people need to reflect on what they think is really private and shouldn't be shared, and share more.
Thanks, Vicky. Penny, there's a couple of questions which are slightly linked. One I'm particularly interested in with my role at the NFU. And there's a question here from Angela Kirkwood about you're highlighting the difficulties about the progression from one organisation to the next. And she's asking what recommendations and examples can you give to improve that transition. And Tanya Robbins is interested to know what groups and organisations you've been able to speak at and to have you been able to facilitate any collaborations? To me, those are slightly linked. So away you go.
So I'll answer the first one. The second one first. Actually, we've not done any work on yet where we should be collaborating other than existing relationships. The relationship between us and other organisations, NFUS is always the easy one to refer to. They've done great work with their Next Gen group, and we've got an Agri Affairs group, and they work together and they do joint events. On a grassroots level, I think it's a little and often, and it is actually reaching out. And I know historically some of the areas had an NFUS rep on their committees, and that's just died away. It's actually reviving some of these traditional relationships. And it's just a little and often, I think. It's just being persistent with it and having the right individuals. Quite often with the young farmer groups, their key office bearers are changing every year as well. So that can be a huge challenge of actually matching up the right people. But if you've got somebody from the NFUS groups sitting on these groups, their regular meetings, then that's a huge benefit. The NFUS Next Generation group has been fantastic in Scotland to bridge that gap as well. So we've a lot of members going from our Agri Affairs group straight to the Next Gen group, who will then filter up the organisation. Thanks,
Penny. Dan, I think there's two really good questions here. Sorry to throw two at you at a time. I know it's hard when you haven't got pen and paper to hand. There's a question here from Ian Knight about, with many farms, the economies of scale and contract farming agreements play an important role to optimise operational costs. And in your research, what have been the best pathways for the larger farms to make this transition to more sustainable farm systems? There's another one on certification, which we'll come to in a sec. But if you, what did you learn about larger farmers making the transition?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Ian. I work quite closely with Ian here, so that wasn't planted, I can assure you. It's difficult, isn't it? I think we're entering a new status anyway with Brexit, with farm subsidies. I was talking to a farmer yesterday locally about what they're going to do. And I think that farm owners, so outside of the contracts themselves, need to understand that perhaps their farms are going to need to change. They're going to need to change the way they look, the way they've operated for a number of years. Larger scale farms that I saw, I mean, probably the biggest was Will Harris, but he was mainly livestock based, and I think he's already on that journey. I think it's the mainstream crop production farmers who are going to need to see that they can't carry on doing as they are doing. It's very difficult. The Kiss the Ground movie that came out, there's a huge number of people, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, that really got their backs up because they feel like they're already doing many of the things that are being spoken about, and perhaps they just don't call themselves regenerative. So I think we've just got to be very careful about the words that we use when we're talking about it. But we also must remember that only 30% of the food produced in the world comes from the bigger food producers. Actually, the majority of food that we eat comes from smaller food producers.
On the words that you use, there is somebody, Rob, in the chat who wants to connect with you on language and is obviously working in that area. So I'll leave you to do that outside of this. The other question I wanted to just put to you was about certification for regenerative agriculture. It's come from Sarah Wells. And how can we make sure that that certification still allows the regenerative agriculture to be farmer-led and doesn't stifle the individuality of farms?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, kind of one of my light bulb moments as I was in Australia earlier this year was that, you know, it is completely farmer driven. You know, I work in a bureaucratic sense as an organic farmer, that I have to meet certain criteria in order to sell our produce organically. Whereas someone calling themselves regenerative, it's pretty much up to them what they do. And that's the beauty of it. And they're in complete control of what they do. The only certification we've seen so far is from the Rodale Institute in America, who've got regenerative organic certification now. And that's really because they're fed up with the USDA diluting the organic standards. So that's something that's come in. There's a couple of organizations in the UK looking at it as well, but we must be really careful that we're not just giving more hoops for farmers to jump through, and it will lessen the desire to want to go in it if you've got to tick a lot of boxes and have someone walk around your farm and measure certain criteria. So I'm hoping it doesn't come in too far, but then if we don't do something like that, how do we sell our produce as regenerative? You know, how do we convince the consumer that one farmer's regenerative is the same as another farmer's? So it's very, very difficult, and perhaps needs to be taken a bit like elms on a local scale, on a farmer to farmer individual scale. People need to look at the whole picture on that farm rather than just certain tick boxes. Thanks,
Dan. Chris, you've had plenty of time to think about the killer question. James Black has said you make some interesting points, but appear to have avoided what is probably the most significant driver of building design, which is the cost. What can you say about the impact a more biophilic driven philosophy will have on the cost of buildings?
The point I was making really is, when I was in the States, I was talking to the kind of experts in design and psychology, and the question that I got asked most often was, why have you got animals in buildings full time? You know, when you've got all this land, why are farmers producing full time indoors? And that is obviously a hot potato question, but you know, the cheapest buildings are no buildings at all. They're trees and hedges and rotational livestock management. So the argument about, you know, the ultimate building, the ultimate most biophilic working environment is our land, which we already have. And so I think everything in terms of subsidies and what's happening in economics, and as you start to think, what happens when I get a carbon footprint bill? You know, how do I reconnect with the consumer in a way that looks great? All these things are pointing us towards mixed farming again, and not mixed farming in a way which is old-fashioned, but the principles of mixed farming, but using modern technology to make sure that we're doing it as best we can. So I don't think that I'm not necessarily advocating let's all build amazing, massive barns. You know, the ultimate answer is, why have we got buildings at all? But if we are building buildings, you know, they should be shelter-based, not enclosed production facilities, in my opinion. And people have got different priorities, that's fine. But I don't think that the incorporation of things like natural light, roof panels and you know, timber sections to the building have to be more more expensive. Of course, there'll be more pioneering people who want to build crazy, wacky, beautiful biophilic curved buildings, and it's there's more pioneering people in every walk of life out there, but it doesn't have to be more expensive because it can be no buildings at all.
Chris, I think you know, it's a really thought-provoking subject.